Hamish, you got a parcel today to the studio, and now you're putting an item on your head, and Jaden's got the camera on me.
No, here we go.
Nice.
A Kanga TV hat.
That's nice.
Thanks for your order. I didn't actually place one. To my positive Delulu, I imagine that's maybe delusional.
I think it's
Delulu, maybe a little slang term.
A bit of love.
A little bit of love. To my positive Delulu, North Melbourne supporting Spirit Animal Hammer. Thank you for all you do for us North fans, keeping us sane and in good spirits through the emotional roller coaster that is supporting this club. Here's to celebrating a few wins soon. Go Roos, love Marnes from Kanga TV.
Well done.
Shout out Marnes at Kanga TV. Because I'll tell you what, it's been a fucking roller coaster of a ride being a North supporter.
Most of the time down.
Horribly down.
And it's a bloody good hat.
It was like this.
It's not really a roller coaster.
It's one of those roller coasters that
This is a plunger.
No. It's. Have you ever been on the giant drop?
Yeah.
It used to be at Dream. It just took you all the way up and then just dropped.
Yeah.
I was sitting next to a woman who pissed herself on that one time. It was horrible. She was pregnant. Shouldn't have gone on there. Anyway, so that's what it's like being on
Did
that
a water break? Or
Yeah.
did
No.
piss?
She just pissed her pants. Okay. And then it's like we get to stages where we do a loop, like the big loop to loop, and then instead of going all the way around, we just stop at the top and fall out of the coaster.
Hamish Brayshaw, welcome to Shinboner Stories. Very long awaited, highly anticipated chat on the channel.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
I feel like we're very similar. We're both very toxically positive about North and about where we're at as a club. And it's really nice to have someone who's in the same boat as me with that.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I just feel like after having been let down for the better part of half a decade, I still just can't do anything but love and get around everything that happens. So it is very toxic because it throws me on a bit of a roller coaster. But the success will come and it'll be all the sweeter. But no, I just love it. Love the North Melbourne Footy Club.
Before we jump into you and your relationship with the club and your time, footy, all that sort of thing, you are based over in WA now, on the other side of the country to all the North Ball action. I lived in Perth for a few years ago, and I really struggled being so far away from the club because my whole life I've been brought up going to the footy with my family every single week. How do you find that being on the other side of the country, a couple hours behind? Do you find that it impacts your supporting nature at all?
Not really. I feel like the reason I moved over here was because I was drafted to West Coast, and when you're playing on another AFL list, you can't support anyone else. So for 3 years of my life, I was shut off to North Melbourne. As much as I still cared about how they went, and you can follow them, you're all in on one team. So I was all in on West Coast for a bit. Coming out of that, I still had a lot of friends at West Coast. Angus was playing for Melbourne. Andrew was playing for Fremantle. So I was invested in those two. And then then my passion for North was still there and came back. But having that 3-year period of going all in on one other team, it's sort of like when you come back to North, you get used to the fact that you're over here now. And so it's not as much of a thing. And having been in an AFL system and then out, you are just a nuffy of the game. But that connection to a footy club and actually having to go there and go to Arden Street and see the boys train and go to games, you just miss it because you're in another system and you're not sort of reliant on that as much. So yeah, I probably don't feel as removed from it as I would have otherwise if I just moved to Perth for work, let's say. But it's it lets me, because we're typically Sunday 4:40, so I can just put the feet up at 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon and watch the games. So I'm fine.
Yeah, that time difference makes a big difference. I remember watching some games 11 o'clock in the morning, which is what you'll be. So we're recording this the week before the Richmond clash, which this Sunday we play at 1:10. So you'll be probably rolling out of bed and straight in front of the TV or rolling straight into the pub to get going.
Yeah, well, it's perfect because you can get up, you do stuff Sunday morning, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can just watch. And more often than not, you're right, it is us on a Sunday, and we're in those sort of back end of the week. But it's perfect for a fan. Anyway, you can just sort of roll out of bed, grab a coffee, have breakfast, and then not too long away at North one. So it's good.
Let's go back to before your time at West Coast and over in Perth. We'll obviously get to that. So you're part of a very quote unquote famous North Melbourne family. Obviously, Father Mark played for North. Your uncle James was the chairman. What was it like growing up as a young North supporter?
Yeah, so I was actually, I'm one of four, and none of the other boys went for North. So Will was a Richmond supporter. So Dad worked at 4 different clubs. So he was the CEO of Richmond. So my older brother went for them. He worked at Fremantle in some marketing role. So Angus was a Fremantle supporter. He worked at Port Adelaide in the marketing department. So Andrew was at Port Adelaide. And then he played at North. The reason I was a North supporter growing up, though, is I had Jack Buckley in my year at school, whose dad's Ben played for North, and then Abe Spargo, whose dad Paul played for North. So the three of us were really, really tight mates, and footy was a big part of that. But then North Melbourne was just the connector of the three of us. Then our families were very good friends with the Crocker family. So Darren is still around, but Joel Crocker was a very good mate of mine who's a mad North supporter. So growing up, that was sort of footy was mixed with everyone, but my closest friends were North Melbourne supporters. And so I just we would go to the game, you'd get on the train, you'd go into Etihad Stadium or Telstra Dome at the time. And given that during that period, Darren was the assistant coach, a lot of stuff I got to go to with Joel and our friend and Jack and Abe was we'd go to family days at Arden Street and then we'd hang around and we'd be in the gym or we'd be mucking around in the change rooms because Croc would take us home. So there was a lot of behind the scenes action at the club. You're spending a lot of time there. You're going to all the games and it just feels very much like you're involved as just like a little kid running around the place. And that was cool, but that's mainly because of the fact that I had such a tight little group of mates that were all massive North fans. So yeah, that's how I sort of came to be in that sort of mindset of a North supporter. And then I was lucky enough that, growing up, we were quite good. We didn't win the grand final, but we always had a relatively successful team before I got picked up.
Pretty much, I feel like you being drafted to West Coast was almost like when our form basically dropped off because you were drafted in 2017, is that right?
Yeah, end of 2017. So 2016, we had the move on of all the older fellas like Boomer, Drew,
Yeah.
Farito, all these guys
That was the last time we played finals that year.
Yeah. So I had 1 year of supporting the club where it was like, oh, we're looking at Drew Petrie wearing a West Coast jumper. And I felt weird about that. And then, next minute it's I'm drafted and you sort of have to try and forget all about it. But yeah, I had a lot of success. I remember I went to finals. I remember some really vivid finals games that I was at. I was at the Frank the Tank game. I went to the trilogy of games. So it was the Essendon one. Then we played Geelong the next week. And then we came to Sydney and lost to Sydney in a prelim. And I went to all those 3 games. So I flew to Sydney and we went and watched that and it was obviously disappointing. But I remember a lot of good times supporting the club. I remember my earliest memory of North was us losing in 07. We lost to Port Adelaide in a prelim for Glenn Archer, who was my all-time favourite player, his last game. And I remember being devastated about that. And then Port Adelaide got whomped next week by Geelong. And I was just sitting there watching that game thinking, oh, we could have done so much better. We would have been we wouldn't have lost this game by 100 points. We would have been a chance. And so there was always success. It felt like growing up supporting, it was always semi-finals, prelims, elimination. So we were always there or thereabouts without really tasting the ultimate success.
It's so funny because I think we're roughly the same age, so I also have those same memories. Like those are my core memories of success for North. It was obviously 2014 and 15, even when you talk about 2007, and we had that semi-final win against Hawthorn. And I went to the grand final in 2015. We had lost to West Coast the week before. We were up at quarter time, and then the umpires took over and wrote the script for the rest of the game. And I don't have to remind anyone watching about that. And I sat in the crowd because the grand final was over by quarter time that year. I think Hawthorn was 6 goals up at quarter time, and that was. And I'm just sitting there sulking, thinking we would have got so much closer to Hawthorn.
We would have done better. Yeah.
Whether we would have or not, you just don't know. But you just assume, you think, and you want to believe that
Yeah.
we were that good. And I do think we were quite good in that period. Probably unlucky to never finish in the top 4, but I don't think we ever would have made a grand final if we couldn't get that top 4 finish.
Yeah, I agree. I think we had such a talented list. And you look back over that period from sort of 2010 to 2016 and the quality of players that we had, and a lot of it, because we're such a small club, it goes unsung throughout the competition. And only guys really like Boomer get any recognition because of the longevity of his career. But we had Scott Thompson was such a good he was an amazing fullback. Obviously, Drew Petrie was a star. Daniel Wells he was my favourite Indigenous player of all time, and as good a player, talent-wise, as as you'll see. But even guys like Sean Atley running off half back, we just had such talent throughout the game. Andrew Swallow was a star. All these guys that just were unheralded throughout the rest of the comp, but just worked together to make such a good team. And I, I look back across that, and as a fan, I just think these guys were so good. But then it's a bit like being in Melbourne and looking over at West Coast. You don't really pay too much attention to them, being an interstate club. But I feel like North Melbourne is the interstate club of Victoria. They're so small and no one really pays them much attention. And throughout that period, we had such good players and we were such a good team, but we had very little recognition for the quality of player that we did have. And yeah, it just sort of went unnoticed that we were making finals, and probably because we didn't finish top four and didn't really make it to a grand final, it just gets parked. But we were good, very good.
We were good. And you mentioned Glenn Archer before as your all-time favorite player. Who are some of your other favorites to watch growing up?
So he was my all-time favorite. I obviously love Boomer. I love Drew. Mentioned before Daniel Wells. Like I remember going to games and seeing him do things that I still haven't seen many people do, but used to have this thing where I was like, if we can just get the ball to Wellsy, he'll do something, run the whole field and kick a goal. Because I was so enamored with how he would play. I loved watching him. Aaron Edwards, I thought was a star. He was so exciting, and I feel like there was a patch there where he was just taking hangers every week. Like that was super exciting. I loved going there and watching that. I mentioned Scott Thompson before, but in terms of like just straight defense, I think he gets so underrated throughout a long time. Of a list of fullbacks, he very rarely gets mentioned, but he was a very, very good player. Sam Wright's another one that I loved, and he played close to 200 games, I think, righty, and was just like no one, unless you're a North Melbourne supporter, it's just like who the hell's Sam Wright? But anyone who listens to this will just know like he was such a star. So I loved them. Ben Cunnington, obviously, he just is the hardest football. George Wardlaw's rivaling him now for just like going hard at the ball, but I'd never seen a more aggressive and physical player than Cunners. The list does go on, like Corey Jones, Star, like I just loved growing up and watching them all. And I have certain favourites, and I remember things. Like I remember being at Majak's first game.
Yeah, me
This is
too.
another, I was talking to someone about this the other day. Like that first centre clearance, Wellesley just kicked it to him, and it was like the whole stadium rose with him to take that mark. And it was just like, you couldn't script it any better. Goes back and kicks it. And it was like things like that were just unbelievable. And I'd seen him when he first got to the club. We went to a family day, and I got him to sign my footy, and he was signing it. And I'm looking at his bicep as he's signing this thing, and I'm like, I've never seen a bigger man in my whole life than who I'm staring at here. He's just cut like a park statue, and then he gets out and it was unbelievable. So there's heaps of memories, and there's just a few. I could go on, but yeah, if I had to put a top three in there, Archer's my all-time favourite. Daniel Wells, I think is the best player that I'd seen throughout that, and then I just loved Boomer. I loved him.
I think that's a pretty solid list. There's definitely, like you said, you could go on for ages. There are so many niche players in there who are probably so underrated amongst the entire
Yeah.
competition, but they hold a special place in our heart for sure.
Yes, that's it.
The plan was to move North Melbourne north, and the idea was there was an established club, and at that point in time they wanted to understand what would be needed to make it successful. And so we gathered at the Northcliffe Surf Club for the big announcement. A number of leading North's players had been flown up. There was a stage constructed. The AFL PR organisation was in full flight. Gil McLachlan was on the phone to Andrew Demetrio. There was an announcement to be made. The Gold Coast Bulletin, the Murdoch publication, had been briefed, and they were ready to roll with a front page that had already been written about how the Gold Coast was going to have its own team. Because the editor at the time, Bob Gordon, who was a highly regarded editor within News Limited, was part of our organising committee. And so everyone was waiting for the announcement, and to everyone's surprise, I guess mostly Gil McLachlan's, it turned out that North, in fact, voted it down and they weren't moving.
Your dad and uncle played a massive role in keeping North Melbourne in Melbourne when there was talks of relocation to the Gold Coast at the end of 2007, 2008. I was too young to really understand the gravity of the situation at the time, but having looked into it now as I'm older, it is scary for me to think about A, how bad a position the club was in, and then B, the possibility that the really real possibility that we actually could have left and moved to the Gold Coast. Did you experience that firsthand? Like, how much of that were you exposed to as a kid? And do you ever sort of think about it and just sort of think and really appreciate how much they did to save the club and really help build it to what it's become today?
Yeah, at the time, probably not. Like I remember Dad being very stressed and always like flat out busy. And the same with my uncle. But it wasn't until later that I realized how far and how close it actually was. And um, I mean, a lot of people don't know the full story of it, but like my dad originally was in the Go camp. So he originally voted for and said we need to for financially and we have to do this. This is too good an offer to knock back. We need to do it. And it was his voice was the final one that flipped it the other way. So he eventually came back around and said we need to stay. And so it was he was the last call. And Daniel Pratt was a coach at West Coast when I was there, and I was good friends with him and have had this conversation with him. Him and Ben Warren were in the Gold Coast. So they were North Melbourne players, but they were both from Queensland. They were actually in the Gold Coast, and they'd been set up. The meeting had been set up to announce that North Melbourne were moving, and they were in a limousine. Everything had been set up to go to this press conference. And basically, the North Melbourne Kangaroos are going to be the Gold Coast Kangaroos, and these guys are obviously Queenslanders, so they're going to present the news. They were in that car going to the press conference when they got a call saying we're off. We're not doing it anymore. And they had Brady tells this funny story. They had the AFL credit card, so they just went out and had a night and enjoyed themselves. But they were literally in the car going to the press conference to say we're relocating as a football club. And it's, in that half an hour they had a last ditch meeting, and Dad was one of the last voices that switched the vote. But yeah, it's not until hearing stories like that did I realise how close we actually were to moving, and it would have changed the fabric of the entire AFL. You wouldn't have brought in Gold Coast, and who knows how that would have worked with the other expansion sides like GWS and now Tassie, and it just would have ripped the fabric out of North Melbourne. But yeah, it was like literally in the car going to the press conference was that's how close it was.
I've never heard that before. That's outrageous. And it's scary to think how close we came because the
Yeah.
club, like you said, would have been ripped apart. Like we wouldn't have a North Melbourne. It would be, just a shell of what we know it to be now. So definitely glad that he made that last minute flip and we ended up getting ourselves back on the right path. While this was all going on, you were
Mhm.
growing up, playing footy. You went through the footy factory at Sandy Dragons. Did you always want to be a footballer? Like, did you always want to play AFL? Was like that your big goal?
Oh, not really. I just loved footy, and growing up, it wasn't until Angus sort of flipped into state under 16s, 18s, and he was going to get drafted, that I realised that I was a good enough player for that to happen. And I got selected for the state under 16 Vic Metro side, and I was like, oh, actually, maybe I can do this. And then seeing him realise that dream, I sort of put two and two together that it was a career pathway. So it wasn't like I picked up a footy when I was 3 and was like, I definitely want to be an AFL player. I just loved the game, so I just played it. And yeah, it wasn't probably until I was about 16, 17 that I realised that I could make a go of it, and actually applied myself a little bit more to being a professional, as much as I could have been. But yeah, probably not the typical like wake up one day as a 3-year-old kicking a footy, Oz kick, oh, this is my dream. I just sort of grew into it naturally through a love of the game and realised that I was probably good enough to give it a go.
My little brother was up, obviously at the draft. He was touted to go pretty high, so him and Mum and Dad were up there. We had the option of me going up there with my brother Angus, who's at Melbourne. I thought it better to probably stay at home, and originally the plan was just me, Angus and my girlfriend Lauren sitting at home and watching it. And then at the very last minute, we sort of decided to go around to a friend's place. So obviously exciting when Andrew went early, and then all the names that you sort of know get picked early on, and you're happy for them. And then you sort of realise that I'm still waiting for my name to be called out. So you sort of sink slowly back into the chair as the night goes on. And by the time my name get called out at number 68, everyone was there excited, and it was, a very awesome feeling.
you were good enough. You were drafted to West Coast, same year that your brother Andy was drafted to Fremantle. What was it like moving across to Perth with him? And obviously, you've had quite different experiences at senior level. How was that for you, both on a personal level to be there with him, but also professionally having a completely different experience?
It was really cool. Like, he obviously got picked up. So the draft night, he was at the draft because he was going to go high. So I knew had gone to Freo, and I knew West Coast was one of about 3 clubs that I'd spoken to in depth. And West Coast had actually told me that they were going to rookie draft me if I didn't get picked up tonight, they'd take me in the rookie draft. So I was sort of sitting there being like, well, I'm a chance to miss tonight, which would be devastating, but I think I'm going to get taken the next day and definitely go over with Andrew. And it worked out that they picked me up, and it was amazing. We were on the same flight. We went there together. Being there for the first little bit was quite different. As you said, I came into a premiership winning side, and Fremantle was sort of in a bit of a dip, and he's a lot better than I am, and he's playing straight away, and I was sort of learning and trying to find where I fit in the team. But it was cool to have obviously a brother there, but we've got family connections in Perth. We're from here. Originally, the family is, and just having him to bounce things off and be, be around as a brother. Like we'd none of us had left home, and so we'd spent 18 years together, and then get to fly and live on the other side of the country. It certainly made the move easier. But in terms of, there was times where I'd compare myself and be like, oh, he's doing a lot better than I am. But then you check yourself and you're like, well, he's your brother, and I'm obviously very happy for him. So yeah, it was a fun experience, and I love it over here, and I'm not moving back. So I'm very set up here, and that's part and parcel because we moved over together, I think.
Did you move in together when you moved over, or were you
No,
separate?
we didn't. We were going to. I had a host family that so the host mum was a Freo supporter, the host dad's a West Coast supporter, and they'd done a lot of hosting for West Coast players before. So I think I was their 5th or their 4th, and Andrew was they have a house big enough that the 2 of us were going to move in. Both clubs were happy with it. And then he ended up going and making the decision to stay with Lockie Neal opened his house to him, and so he moved in there, and that worked better. But no, we didn't live together when we moved over here, but we had family, and we had family friends, and so we would see each other once or twice a week. And yeah, we would, and I ended up moving into his house a couple of years later and stayed with him for 4 or 5 months, and we since did live together. But yeah, when we first got here, it was opposite sides of the city, and we'd just move. We'd catch up once or twice a week.